A deformed body, unbearable pain, an odor so nauseating it made courtiers faint. After his death, cake fluids leaked from his coffin and were lapped up by stray dogs. This was the horrible end of one of history's most feared monarchs. Today, we reveal the true story of the death of Henry VI of England, a tale so grotesque that it is rarely told in all its repugnant reality. Henry Tudor was born on June 28, 1491. When he ascended to the throne at 17, he was considered Europe's most handsome prince. Tall, athletic, with golden red hair and majestic bearing. A Venetian ambassador wrote that he possessed an extraordinary figure and angelic countenance, superior in beauty to any other Christian prince. How, then, did this exemplar of virility and power end up suffering such a degrading death? The turning point was an accident that occurred in January 1536 during a jousting tournament in Greenwich. At 44 years of age, Henry suffered a terrible fall when his horse collapsed on him. The king remained unconscious for 2 hours, and although he survived, the injury to his right leg would never completely heal. This wound transformed into an open ulcer that constantly suppurated, exhaling a fetid odor that announced his presence even before he entered a room. It was a devastating humiliation for such a vain king. Courtiers were obliged to endure the smell without showing revulsion, under penalty of facing royal wrath. The accident also marked the beginning of a transformation in his behavior. Coincidentally or not, it occurred during the same period when Henry ordered the execution of his second wife, Anne Boleyn, under fabricated accusations of adultery and treason. Some historians suggest that the brain injury resulting from the fall may have exacerbated existing tendencies toward paranoia and fits of rage. With reduced mobility, the king began to gain weight rapidly. His waist, which measured 89 centimeters in his youth, expanded to more than 130 centimeters. His weight exceeded 180 kilograms, making him so obese that he needed to be moved between royal apartments using a specially designed pulley system. The door frames in the palaces had to be widened to allow his passage. The royal diet contributed enormously to his decline. Kitchen records show that Henry consumed approximately 5,000 calories daily, mainly from red meats, with very little vegetables. A typical dinner included multiple types of meat pies and impressive quantities of wine and beer. This regimen, combined with forced inactivity, dramatically accelerated his physical deterioration. The ulcers on his legs worsened over time. Physicians applied treatments that we now know were harmful: cauterization with hot iron, application of mixtures containing arsenic and mercury, and regular bloodletting that only weakened him further. The wounds became so severe that bones were visible through the decomposing flesh. The smell was so nauseating that his presence could be detected 3 rooms away. At 49, Henry married Catherine Howard, a young woman of only 19. He described this marriage as a return to youth. However, the age difference, combined with his physical condition, made the union a grotesque spectacle. Catherine, unable to bear her deformed and malodorous husband, sought comfort in the arms of a young courtier. When the affair was discovered, the king ordered the execution of both. His last marriage, to Catherine Parr in 1543, was more a political arrangement than a romantic one. Catherine assumed more the role of a nurse than a wife, caring for the dying king with surprising dedication, considering the fate of her predecessors. In his final years, Henry suffered from multiple medical conditions. Modern experts believe he likely suffered from diabetes, severe gout, hypertension, and heart failure. Some suggest syphilis, although this diagnosis is disputed by many current historians. This combination of diseases transformed his last years into continuous torment. Accounts from the period describe how the king alternated between periods of unbearable pain, during which he screamed and cursed everyone around him, and moments of deep melancholy, when he remained motionless for hours. Henry's paranoia intensified along with his physical suffering. The once brilliant statesman became obsessed with imaginary conspiracies, executing close friends and loyal advisors on unfounded suspicions. Terror dominated the court, as an imprudent comment or a misinterpreted look could result in an accusation of treason. Notably, he ordered the execution of Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, just 9 days before his own death. His fear of poisoning became an obsession. He implemented an elaborate food security system, requiring servants to taste each dish before it reached his table. All utensils were meticulously inspected. This fixation may have been a symptom of his increasing mental instability or the result of recurring minor strokes. As the end approached, Henry's suffering reached almost unimaginable levels. In his final months, he could barely move, even with help. Gangrene had set in his legs, intensifying the already unbearable odor. The royal court became a place of miasma and whispers, with courtiers covering their noses with perfume-soaked handkerchiefs while forcing themselves to remain in the royal presence. During his last winter in 1546–47, the king's health deteriorated rapidly. He suffered from recurrent fevers, probably due to septicemia from the numerous infections in his body. His breathing became increasingly difficult, and episodes of delirium became frequent. Witnesses reported that during these moments, the king often murmured the names of his deceased wives, particularly Jane Seymour, who died after giving birth to his only legitimate son, and possibly Anne Boleyn, whose ghost they said tormented him. Curiously, despite his obviously terminal condition, no one at court dared suggest that the king was dying. English law considered it treason to predict the monarch's death, so physicians and courtiers maintained the facade that his recovery was possible, even when the smell of decomposition was already emanating from his still-living body. On January 27, 1547, realizing that his end was near, Henry finally allowed Archbishop Thomas Cranmer to be called to his bedside. Unable to speak, he squeezed Cranmer's hand when asked if he died in the Christian faith. This was his last conscious gesture. In the early hours of January 28, at 55 years of age, the once powerful king exhaled his last breath. But the indignity of his condition did not end with death. Due to his enormous size, a special coffin had to be constructed to contain his remains. Preparing the body for the funeral was a horrifying challenge for the royal embalmers. The embalming process at the time was rudimentary, primarily involving the removal of viscera and filling the cavities with aromatic herbs. During the following days, while the body awaited the state funeral, one of the most macabre episodes associated with Henry's death occurred. The coffin, inadequately sealed to contain the gases and fluids of decomposition, began to leak while it rested in the chapel of Cannes Abbey. During the night, contemporary accounts describe a disturbing scene. Cadaveric fluid trickled onto the chapel floor, where it was discovered by stray dogs that licked up the putrid substance. This story, recorded by chroniclers of the time, represents a profoundly humiliating end for a king who had built his image around power, majesty, and divine authority. The mighty Henry, who had defied the Pope, redefined English religion, and sent 2 wives to the scaffold, ended as a mass of putrefied flesh, his body violated by street animals. The funeral finally took place on February 16, 1547, almost 3 weeks after his death. Despite the unbearable smell emanating from the coffin, the ceremonies were conducted with all the pomp expected for such a powerful monarch. He was buried in St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, alongside Jane Seymour, the only wife who had given him the much-desired male heir, Edward VI. Ironically, Edward, whose existence had motivated many of Henry's controversial decisions, including the break with Rome, reigned for only 6 years before dying of illness at 15. The throne then passed to Mary, the first daughter of Catherine of Aragon, who attempted to reverse her father's Protestant reforms, and finally to Elizabeth, the first daughter of Anne Boleyn, who would establish a golden age in English history. The grotesque death of Henry VIII serves as a powerful reminder of the limits of human power. The king who considered himself above the law, capable of redefining the national religion and disposing of human lives at his whim, was, in the end, a victim of his own mortal body. His death was not just the end of a man, but the symbol of the decline of an era. English historian Alison Weir wrote, "It is one of the great paradoxes of history that a man who began with so much promise, beauty, and ability ended as a grotesque caricature of himself, tormented by physical pain and mental instability, feared and flattered by those around him, but rarely truly loved." The transformation of Henry VIII from ideal Renaissance prince to obese and sick tyrant remains one of the most fascinating case studies of how absolute power, combined with chronic pain and progressive disease, can transform an individual. His political legacy, the separation of England from Rome and the establishment of the Anglican Church, continues to shape the modern world, but his personal end serves as a reminder of human fragility. The last moments of Henry's life, with his labored breathing and deformed body, contrast dramatically with the official portraits that show him in all his royal majesty. This dissonance between public image and private reality is one of the great lessons of his life and death. Thus ended the existence of one of history's most notorious monarchs, not with glory, but with an unbearable stench and an end unworthy of his crown. The man who transformed England and permanently altered the course of Western history ended up like all of us, a victim of the inevitable deterioration of the flesh. The death of Henry VIII was not just a historical event, but also a symbolic moment that reflects on the ephemeral nature of power. In his final years, as the king's body deteriorated, so too did the myth of royal invulnerability. The monarchy, a divine institution that considered itself above the laws of nature, was forced to recognize its own mortality. The final irony in Henry VIII's life is that the man who strove so hard to ensure a male lineage, to the point of breaking with Rome and executing 2 wives, engendered a fragile son who would die young. His true legacy would come through his daughters, particularly Elizabeth I, daughter of the woman he executed under false accusations. Perhaps the deepest lesson in the death of Henry VIII is that not even absolute power can conquer the limitations of the human body. The man who rewrote the laws of his nation to satisfy his desires could not rewrite the laws of nature. In the end, even the most powerful of kings faces the same fate as the humblest of subjects. The death of Henry VIII is not just a story of medical horror, but a moral tale about the limits of human power and the inevitability of physical deterioration. His body, which was once admired as the embodiment of royalty, became a symbol of the transience of all earthly glory. This narrative reminds us that, in the end, we are all equal before death, regardless of our achievements or social positions. The terrible death of Henry VIII continues to fascinate and horrify, precisely because it reveals the vulnerable humanity behind the facade of absolute power.